And then another thing we gotta know, another keyword to understand Gaudi, that's nature. You have to see nature on his buildings, because that's what he's copying all the time. So maybe that facade are the waves of the sea, or maybe representing the hills around Barcelona, the ironwork of the balconies as if they were the leaves of the trees in front of the building. Mr. and Mrs. Milà, the owners, lived originally on the second floor. The second floor used to be the best part of the house 100 years ago. You can tell looking at the other buildings, have always the bottom nicer than the top. This is because back then, or they had no elevators, or if they had them, they were extremely slow. Elevators were very slow 100 years ago because they were afraid of them. They were something new. In the Gaudi house, there was an elevator, but it was 15 minutes from the bottom to the top. So even if they have an elevator, the most expensive part of the building, it's always the second floor. And you can tell, looking at the architecture of them, how they have nicer decoration down than up. Have a look right and left, and you'll see buildings that are not by famous architects, but they all have beautiful stuff. Ironwork, stained glass, stonework. For example, this one now, to your left-hand side, look at the beautiful ironwork at the bottom diagonal. Here on the diagonal, we have another beautiful building. It's on the right-hand side. Have a look on the right-hand side now, and we're passing Casa de las Punchas. On your right, another masterpiece of the Art Nouveau. This is a private building. So it was done not by Gaudi, by Puig Cadafalch. As you can see around here, the rest of the neighborhood is all made of the same type of street, like many other cities around the world. Straight lines, north-south, east-west, or the opposite. But there's an exception. There's something peculiar in Barcelona that is not just the typical chessboard, and this is that they chop the corners. You can see that every time we go across a street, like here, for example, to the right or to the left, the buildings have no corners. This was an idea they had back on the 1800s. For people, they believed that like this, life was going to be nicer. People were going to think that they have more space. Number one. On top of that, the ventilation and the illumination was better, and also the movement around the city for people, for vehicles, especially back then when they had no traffic lights. If you could see who comes from the other side, you could safely go across the street. Okay, it didn't help much our dear Gaudi, who, as we said, was killed by a streetcar in this part of the city. But of course, this is one of the reasons why they projected this section like this. So actually, the blocks are octagons. Huh? So this neighborhood, blocks and blocks and blocks, was all built on the second half of the 1800s in Barcelona. And here, as we said, they were doing hundreds of new apartment buildings, but also new food markets, new churches, new hospitals, new schools for the kids of this family. So La Sagrada Familia by Gaudí was going to be one more church for this part of the city. But we have to say, this is something maybe many of you haven't heard about, it's important that we say that originally the Catholic Church, who was the one that bought a plot of land here and looked for an architect to make a project, did not commission Gaudi. The first architect that was commissioned for building a church here was somebody else called Villar. That first architect did a project of a small neo-Gothic church, and they began the construction of that. But 1 year after, Villar doesn't want to continue, so he passes the job to his young disciple Gaudí. That's when Gaudí was only 31 years old, and he was hired to build the church planned by another. And he did that for a bit of time. He will finish one little part of the project of the first architect, that's the crypt. still today under the main church. With the pass of time, Gaudi will tell the Catholic Church that he wants to continue with this project, but just doing some little changes, he told them.